The Pumpkin Man. I don't think I'll ever forget that Halloween night. I can't forget it, no matter how hard I try. Sometimes I think it would be better if I could forget it, you know? Maybe if I could just make it disappear from my mind, I'd stop feeling like he's still watching me, like he's still out there, waiting. But that night, it's carved into me, just like a knife into a pumpkin. It was me, Ben, Tony, and Rick. We'd been friends since high school, inseparable. Halloween was our favorite holiday, always had been. We'd go big every year, elaborate costumes, crazy parties, the works. We were supposed to go to this big Halloween bash downtown, but Tony, always the spontaneous one, decided we should throw our own party at his place instead. He'd inherited this old, creaky house from his grandfather, a house with this gloomy, eerie charm. Seemed perfect for Halloween, right? We didn't bother with decorations. The house itself was creepy enough. But Tony thought it'd be cool to get a pumpkin. Just one, he said, like some kind of centerpiece. So we went to one of those pop-up Halloween shops in town and grabbed this massive pumpkin. It was the kind that looked like it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. When we got back to Tony's place, he set the pumpkin right in the middle of the living room. I remember him grinning, saying, "There. That's all the decoration we need." We carved it out, took turns hacking into it, making it look as twisted as possible. I remember Ben giving it this jagged, too wide grin, and Rick added some weirdly shaped eyes that made it look like it was glaring. Tony stuck a candle in it, and when he lit it, that pumpkin, well, it didn't just look creepy. It looked wrong. It cast these long, twisting shadows across the room, and if you looked at it too long, it felt like it was staring right back at you. But we laughed it off. It was Halloween, right? Everything's supposed to be a little messed up. We cracked open some beers, started playing music, just four idiots in costume trying to scare each other. I went as a zombie, Ben was a vampire, Tony was some kind of undead pirate, and Rick went as a scarecrow, straw sticking out of his sleeves and pants, face painted like he'd sewn his mouth shut. Real freaky, but that was Rick for you. As the night went on, things got strange. I remember feeling this heavy, uneasy feeling settle over us, like the air itself was weighing us down. The music seemed too loud, the shadows from the pumpkin too dark. Every time I looked at that pumpkin, I felt this coldness crawl up my spine. We started hearing things, too. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then Ben leaned over to me and whispered, "Hey, do you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist. "Footsteps," he said. "Upstairs." I brushed it off, laughed even, told him he was just paranoid. But a few minutes later, we all heard it. A creak from the second floor, followed by a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. We looked at each other, half expecting someone to laugh and admit it was a joke. But no one said anything. The room went quiet, dead quiet, except for the faint crackle of the candle inside the pumpkin. Tony, trying to be the brave one, grabbed his flashlight and said, "Probably just some rats. I'll go check it out." He headed up the stairs, and we sat there in the dark, waiting. The silence was thick, like the walls were pressing in on us. I kept my eyes on the staircase, watching for Tony to come back. But he didn't. Not right away. Finally, Ben stood up. "He's taking too long," he muttered, and started toward the stairs. I wasn't about to be left alone down there, so I got up, too. Rick followed, and the three of us crept up the stairs, each step creaking under our weight. We reached the top, looked down the hallway, and there was Tony, just standing there, his flashlight pointed at an open door at the end of the hall. "Tony?" I whispered, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, frozen, staring into that room. When we got closer, I put my hand on his shoulder, and he jumped, like he'd snapped out of some kind of trance. His face was pale, his eyes wide with this look I'd never seen before. It was in there, he stammered, pointing to the dark room. What was? I asked, my voice shaking. The pumpkin man, he whispered. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe he was messing with us, trying to scare us. But the look on his face, he was terrified. There's no one in there, man, Rick said, trying to sound tough, but even he looked spooked. I'm telling you, Tony insisted, his voice trembling. I saw him. Standing right there, looking at me. His face, it was all wrong. Like that damn pumpkin. We were all starting to feel it now, that creeping sense of dread. We checked the room, found nothing, and went back downstairs, each of us trying to shake off the fear. But when we got back to the living room, the pumpkin, it looked different. Its face was somehow even more twisted, more menacing, like it was grinning wider, its eyes sharper, angrier. Ben laughed nervously, picking up his beer. This thing's really getting to us, huh? It's just a pumpkin. Let's just relax. It's Halloween. We're just spooking ourselves out. We tried to keep the mood light, joking around, making fun of each other's costumes, but the feeling never left. I kept glancing over at that pumpkin, feeling its gaze bore into me, like it was waiting for something. And then, the power went out. The music stopped, the lights flickered off, and the only thing illuminating the room was the candle inside that damn pumpkin. Its light stretched across the walls, casting shadows that looked like twisted, reaching arms. We grabbed our phones, using the flashlight apps, each of us standing there in tense silence, not daring to move. That's when we heard it. A soft, scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor, coming from the hallway. Tony whispered, I told you. I told you he was real. We huddled together, too scared to go see what was making that sound. The dragging got louder, closer, until it sounded like it was just outside the room. I held my breath, clutching my phone, the light shaking in my hand. And then, slowly, the noise stopped. We stood there, listening, waiting. I don't know how long we stood there, but it felt like hours. Finally, Rick, trying to be brave, took a step toward the doorway. I'm gonna check it out, he whispered. Before we could stop him, he stepped into the hallway. We watched as his flashlight illuminated the corridor, casting long, eerie shadows. And then, he screamed. We ran toward him, our hearts pounding, but by the time we reached the hallway, he was gone. Just, gone. His phone was lying on the floor, the flashlight still on, but there was no sign of him. Ben grabbed my arm, his face pale. What the hell is going on, man? Where is he? I didn't have an answer. None of us did. All I knew was that something was in the house with us, something that wasn't human. And it was picking us off, one by one. The sound started again, scraping, dragging, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. This time, it was followed by a low, raspy whisper, almost too soft to hear. Who wants to play? We bolted. I don't even remember which direction we ran, we just knew we had to get out. We stumbled down the hallway, through rooms that seemed unfamiliar, the shadows twisting around us. It was like the house itself was changing, leading us deeper and deeper, away from the exit. Tony tripped, falling hard to the floor. Ben and I tried to pull him up, but he was sobbing, his face pale with terror. He's here, he's here. Before we could react, something moved in the darkness. A figure, tall and thin, with a head that looked like a twisted, grinning pumpkin, stepped out from the shadows, its eyes hollow, its mouth curling into a sinister smile. We dragged Tony to his feet and ran, barely able to see where we were going. I could hear Ben screaming, hear Tony gasping for breath, but I didn't dare look back. All I knew was that if we stopped, we were dead. We reached the stairs, practically throwing ourselves down them, and stumbled into the living room. The pumpkin was still there, its grin wider than ever, its eyes watching us, like it was mocking us. Ben ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. He yanked on the handle, pounded on the wood, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped. And then, Tony was gone. 1 second he was beside me, the next, just gone, as if he'd been swallowed by the shadows. I turned to Ben, my voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" He didn't answer. He was staring at something behind me, his face twisted in horror. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and there he was, the Pumpkin Man, standing right in front of me, his hollow eyes staring into mine. I don't remember what happened next. I remember screaming, running, pushing past Ben. I remember hearing him shout, hearing him struggle, and then, silence. When I finally found the door, it opened. Just like that. I stumbled outside, gasping for air, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I looked back at the house, expecting to see something. But it was quiet. Dark. I was the only one who made it out. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if they're still in there, trapped in the dark, or if that thing took them somewhere else. All I know is that I'll never go back to that house, never celebrate Halloween again. And every year, when October rolls around, I still feel it. That same chill, that same sense of dread. Like he's still out there, waiting.